happened when I was 17 years old, so some of the details are vague to me. As kids, we would always go exploring on Friday nights, just the three of us. Tonight, we explored the old church at the end of town. Our flashlight's beam bounced off the shattered stained glass windows, casting eerie, fragmented rainbows across the ruined pews. The place had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. The further we ventured into the church, the colder it got, the silence pressing down on us like a weight. The church wasn't just old, it felt alive somehow. As we reached the altar, my flashlight flickered. The beam dimmed, then returned to full strength, but the uneasy feeling in my gut remained. I heard something soft, almost imperceptible, like the shuffle of feet on the cracked stone floor. My heart started pounding in my chest. It was too quiet, too empty. We turned toward the sound. At first, we saw nothing but a darkened aisle, the far end of the church, swallowed by shadows. But then, just as I was about to step forward, I saw it. A figure. At the back of the church, standing just beyond the last row of pews, was a man dressed in a clown costume. We all froze. The clown's face was painted white, lips curled into a grotesque, permanent grin. The red nose looked too big, too bright, almost cartoonish. It was wearing a tattered costume. The stained in only what I hoped wasn't the worst. It didn't move. It just stood there. I noticed the clown had something in his hand, but between the darkness and shadows, I couldn't make out what it was. My friend, whose name I won't say, pointed his flashlight towards the end of the church at the clown. It was clearer now what he was holding. A knife. That's when it moved. The clown's head jerked up, and its eyes, those hollow pits, focused directly on me. Its grin stretched impossibly wide. We could hear its footsteps now. Slow. Deliberate. Each step creaked against the floor, the sound growing closer, louder. Without another thought, we ran. My heart hammered in my chest as we sprinted toward the exit, my breath coming in ragged gasps. We could hear footsteps behind us. Without another breathe, we ran into the night of the forest back to my friend's car. It was rumored that there had been homeless people living in that church for some time now. We didn't go to the police because we were kids and didn't want to get in trouble without parents. Although nobody had ever saw anyone before tonight, it's clear something was going on in that church that night. What that is, I don't ever want to know. I had just finished my shift at Denny's, and the roads were practically empty as I made my way home. It was one of those cold, quiet nights where the air feels heavy, like something's about to happen, but you can't put your finger on it. I wasn't tired, but my mind was starting to wander as I drove down the dark highway. The headlights from my car barely cut through the fog that had started to roll in, making everything feel distant and unfamiliar. As I approached a bend in the road, I saw something strange up ahead. A figure standing at the side of the road. I could make out a man in the fog, dressed as a clown. My heart immediately started pounding. His costume was old, worn out. His face was painted with bright colors. Red nose, exaggerated grin, big round eyes. But there was something unsettling about it. It looked forced, stretched, like it didn't belong. He stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead, unmoving, even as I slowed down. I thought maybe he was just someone who had broken down, or a prankster, but something about the way he was standing made me uneasy. I slowed even further as I passed him, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. I expected him to turn and watch me drive away, but instead, I saw him start to walk down the road behind me. Slowly, almost like he was pacing me. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I pushed the gas pedal, trying to shake off the fear. The road was empty. No other cars. I kept glancing at my mirrors, but I couldn't see the clown anymore. It was as if he had disappeared. But then, there he was again. He was standing by the side of the road. Closer this time. Much closer. His painted face now almost visible in the faint light. He was staring directly at me, his eyes wide open, unblinking. I froze for a second. I slammed my foot down on the pedal and sped out of there as fast as I could. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't behind me. I didn't stop looking until I turned into my neighborhood, where the streetlights finally broke through the fog. I pulled into my driveway, my hands trembling on the wheel. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. But just as I got out of the car, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A faint laugh, distant but clear, like the sound of someone laughing from the shadows. I spun around, but there was nothing. No clown. I ran inside and locked my doors. I couldn't make out whether it was just some teenage kid playing a prank or someone who had a worse intent. It scares me to think, though, what might have happened if I had stopped my car that night. It was my 7th birthday, and I was excited for the party. My parents had promised all the fun. A big cake, balloons, presents, and of course the clown. But there was something off about the clown. Something I couldn't quite place. Every year we had the same one. Mr. Bubbles. He wasn't like the clowns you see on TV. He wasn't colorful or fun. No, Mr. Bubbles was old. His makeup was cracked, his hair a sickly, faded orange, and his costume looked like it had been worn for decades. His big red nose always sagged, like it was losing air, and his smile, always so wide, never seemed to match his eyes. I didn't think much of it when I was younger, but by the time I turned 7, I started to notice how wrong he felt. He'd always linger around me during the party, his cold, empty gaze following me, like he was watching, waiting. I could never shake the feeling that he was up to something. That day, as the party raged on with laughter and games, Mr. Bubbles appeared, standing at the edge of the light, watching me from the shadows. He didn't say anything, just stared. I tried to ignore him, but the feeling in my chest was heavy. My mom was busy chatting with other parents, and I could hear the other kids laughing, oblivious to the way he loomed in the corner. Eventually, Mr. Bubbles started his usual routine, juggling, making balloon animals, and honking that sad horn of his. But something was different this time. His eyes never left me. His gaze felt colder than usual, darker, like he knew something I didn't. It made my skin crawl. Then he stopped. Everyone went quiet, and he turned toward me. "Come here, little one," he rasped, a grin spreading across his face. "Time for your special birthday surprise." I froze, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to go up to him, but my mom was smiling, urging me to. Reluctantly, I took a few steps toward him. When I stood in front of him, his eyes were too close. His face smelled faintly of old rotting fabric. "You've grown so much," he whispered, leaning in. "I've been watching you. All these years." My stomach twisted. I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at him, frozen in place. "Next year, I'll be back," he muttered, standing up straight. "But next time, it will be different." I didn't understand, but a chill ran through me. Before I could say anything, he turned and walked away, melting back into the darkness of the party, like he'd never been there at all. I tried to enjoy the rest of the night, but every laugh, every game, felt distant. Mr. Bubbles was still in the room with me, his cold eyes watching. That night, After everyone left, I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing the faint honking of a horn in the distance. It was the sound of his horn. I never heard or saw Mr. Bubbles again. A few years later, there was a man that was arrested on the news for stalking other kids. His face, almost exactly like Mr. Bubbles,